Charles Murray, no more.
Public safety.
Anti-worker.
To go and
Anti-war.
going to do it.
Charles Murray.
Well, the Forces of Tolerance did their best today to stop another Charles Murray event from taking place. The sociologist spoke at Villanova, but he had to be escorted out for his own safety after several people disrupted the event and called him a white supremacist. Murray returned after several people were rejected by the police. George Ciccarello-Maher is a professor at nearby Drexel University and a self-described radical political theorist. 2 days ago, he urged the disruption of Murray's speech, calling on students to, quote, make this impossible. Professor Ciccarello-Maher joins us tonight from Mexico City. Professor, thanks for coming on. I wonder if you see something inconsistent with someone who teaches at a university dedicated to the idea of the open exchange of ideas, calling for ideas he disagrees with to be shut down.
I think we should be clear that universities are actually spaces for rational ideas, for arguments that are based in fact and evidence. And the reality is that Charles Murray has never based his arguments in evidence or facts. He has never passed any kind of rigorous academic examination of those ideas. He doesn't publish with academic presses. Instead, he's actually had his research paid for by right-wing think tanks. They paid for him to write books like The Bell Curve. They paid for those books to be published, and then they actually paid for journalists to read and take seminars on those books to spread the gospel, as it were. So this is kind of the worst kind of pseudo-intellectual pay-for-play, and that doesn't guarantee you a platform on a university campus.
So because he hasn't been published in academic journals and hasn't passed through the gauntlet of other professors assessing his work, though of course he has, because he has been an academic, but by that standard, I don't know, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, none of them, I recall, publishing in academic journals. Is their writing also out of bounds on Drexel's campus?
So I think the question is really also about the content of these writings. Let's be clear. This is someone who is defined as a white nationalist by the Southern Poverty Law Center, someone who burned crosses in his youth and went on to play a role in violent counterinsurgency during the Vietnam War, and then who went on to support mass incarceration, the gutting of welfare.
Okay, let me just stop you there. Just back up one step. He burned crosses in his youth. I know Charles Murray. I know quite a bit about him. I've read his books, I'm sure, unlike you. I'm not familiar with that. Can you substantiate that claim?
Okay, well, you should have done research. It doesn't take much research to realize that this is something that happened. He claimed it wasn't racist, which might be plausible were it not for the fact that he went on to basically make a constant eugenic argument for racial inferiority through the rest of his career, arguing that black Americans and that Latinos are inferior.
I don't want to get hung up, but since we're having a debate about what is accurate and what is not, what are you talking about? Charles Murray was a member of the Klan? I mean, you can't throw these things out here. I know this is not an academic journal, but substantiate that claim, please.
Now, I mean, Tucker, I'm pretty sure you know what Google is, and I'm pretty sure you know how to do research. And if you did that, then you would realize that this is something he's admitted to, although he claimed that it had no racial undertones. Unfortunately, as I said, he went on to write that blacks and Latinos are racially inferior, that they're genetically debased. And he's gone on more recently, actually, this might be interesting for your audience, that he's gone on more recently to actually argue that poor whites are becoming genetically inferior as well. This is someone who uses the most flimsy pseudoscience that's been debunked in every way possible, and yet people continue to take it seriously because it makes them feel better.
So look, you're saying that someone who makes racially inflammatory claims that haven't been vetted by the academic establishment shouldn't be allowed to speak on a college campus, and yet people have said that of you. You called on Twitter for, and I'm quoting, white genocide, obviously a racially inflammatory thing to say. People tried to shut you down, and you called those people a mob and defended academic freedom when it applied to you. How is he more racially inflammatory than you calling for white genocide?
I'm losing my faith. I'm really losing my faith in your ability to use Twitter. I mean, to use Google, because if you used Google, the first thing you would realize is that, of course, white genocide is not a real thing. It's a racial fantasy of the kind that Charles Murray and his ilk like to put forward.
But
and when you
called
put forward these arguments,
Twitter.
I'm not saying that no one should be. I'm not saying they shouldn't be allowed on campus. I'm saying that they haven't earned any kind of platform on campus, and the free speech rights of those who are most affected by that racist hate speech comes into play. They're able to protest as they did today.
I'm doing my best to take you
peacefully at Villanova before they were attacked.
Nobody takes you seriously I'm trying to take you seriously. You're accusing this guy of racial demagoguery, and you called for white genocide. You also applauded the Haitian Revolution for killing whites. Look, those are your views. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to express them. I'm merely pointing out the irony that you're trafficking in race hatred, and yet saying that Charles Murray shouldn't be allowed to speak because he traffics in race hatred. Are you self-aware enough to catch that?
I actually believe, I believe in a very fundamental way that all people are equal. What's very interesting and different is that Charles Murray does not, and he's dedicated his life to arguing that people are inferior and that those inferior people should not have access to education, should not have access to social welfare.
I think he's argued for genocide.
Out of higher education.
Okay, right. I doubt you've read a Charles Murray book, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Supported by.
Okay, but answer my question. You called for white genocide, and I'm not making it up. It actually got a lot of attention. Are you going to defend that as a principled academic stand? I mean, what does that mean exactly? And
I really, maybe I gave you too much credit. Maybe I thought you were too smart. Maybe I thought that you would actually do your research and figure out, for example, what is satire, what's clearly satire, what talks about an imaginary concept of white genocide, which is upheld by the likes of Steve Bannon and all these alt-right figureheads who actually think that white people in the United States are under existential threat. I do not believe that.
Okay. So here's something that I mean, I don't even understand the answer, but I'm going to pass on to something you said just a couple days ago, and this is on your Twitter account. You said, some guy gave up his first-class seat for a uniformed soldier. People are thanking him. I'm trying not to vomit or yell about Mosul. Was that satire, too? What does that mean? Or are you going to blame Steve Bannon for that as well?
I think it's really irresponsible to blindly support, for example, wars that send off young people into combat, risk their lives, kill many others, as we've just seen in Mosul, 200 people incinerated by U.S. bombs, and to not do that in a way that expands anyone's freedom, that makes anyone less secure. The Iraq War
but
has
you're
not protected anyone's
blaming
freedom.
the soldier. You're not blaming the policymakers. You're saying you're saying giving up a seat for a soldier in uniform made you want to vomit. You're not saying giving up a seat for the guy who made the war policy, but for the soldier, the guy who's risking his life. Why'd that make you feel like throwing up?
I think U.S. troops need real support. They don't need symbolic gestures. What they need is not a first-class seat. What they need is health care support, psychological support. Women in uniform need to not be subjected to an epidemic of sexual assault. And more than anything, they don't need to be deployed, have their lives risked, be taken away from their families for wars that do nothing and no good for anyone.
But why is it bad to get, okay, that's fine, but why is it bad to give him a first-class seat? I'm missing that. Someone's trying to be nice to the guy who's going through all these hardships you just described, and that makes you mad. Why?
I'm all for generous gestures devoted toward those who most deserve them in our society, and I have the deepest respect for anyone who, particularly for economic reasons, makes difficult decisions, whether it's joining the military, whether it's, doing other dangerous work that has to take place in our society, whether it's being an economic migrant. And I think these people all deserve better. They deserve to not have to join the military if they would rather just get an education.
But he did. He doesn't have a government-subsidized job at a university like you. So why that make you mad?
To not have the health care and the psychological support that they need. This is how we support the troops, not by sending them off into wars.
Okay. So you began this conversation with reference to your own scholarship and the academic journals that you and your fellow professors publish in. And because I do want to take you seriously, I actually spent some time reading some of them today. And I want you to explain to me what this means. Now, I was an editor for a long time, not an academic press, but an editor. You wrote a piece called Dual Power in the Venezuelan Revolution. This is the second paragraph, and I'm quoting it. By viewing the process through the Leninist concept of dual power, that is the construction of an autonomous alternative power capable of challenging the existing state structure, we can see that the establishment of communal councils in Venezuela is clearly a positive step toward the development of fuller and deeper democracy, which is encouraging in and of itself. Now, that's a sentence with too many adjectives, a passive construction, imprecise language. It's high school writing. It's crap. And I'm wondering, is your scholarship serious?
I really appreciate you digging into the vault. I appreciate you digging into the vault to actually closely read some of my
You're not an impressive scholar.
Really
that's what I'm saying. You're a performance artist. That's not impressive.
That's shown himself unable to use Google today. This is really interesting. I've got 3 books.
What does that mean? I just read.
I don't need to flout academic credentials in front of you.
But you're not capable of writing a clear sentence. Now, I went through a lot of different essays that you wrote, and I've got an IQ above room temperature, and I couldn't understand any of them because your writing is childlike. It's childlike.
It's strange.
And I'm wondering,
almost as though your entire
can you
shtick today is to
explain
show
what that
you're
means?
incapable of grasping very simple and very basic things.
Okay,
I've done
so what is
studies on popular power in Venezuela, on the development of what are called communal councils. I know them better than most, and I know what it means to develop these participatory institutions of democracy in Venezuela. I'm glad to talk about them. But if your entire shtick is to come on here and say that you can't understand basic English and basic sentences,
I'm really not sure
where to start.
But
Tucker.
it's not basic English. I've spent a lot of time writing and editing basic English, and it's designed to make the idea clearer, not to cloak them from people. So two things are going on. Either you don't really know what you're saying because you don't understand it yourself, or you're trying to hide it from the person for whom you're writing. And neither one is impressive. And I guess my point is, the only writing I have read by you that I can understand clearly are your tweets. And they seem to be designed to shock people, to get attention. It seems, again, a species of performance art, not scholarship. Has this occurred to you?
I mean, performance art is scholarship. Let's be real about that. But you seem to be able to understand the very short pieces that I write, and yet when you sit down to try to read the longer things, you suddenly want to perform your own inability to actually read and to digest. Plenty of people have read my work, they appreciate it, and yet you're here defending someone like Charles Murray, who very few people defend, who is a
I'm not defending Charles Murray. I'm defending
about them. We're here talking about.
I'm defending his right to say what he thinks. And I think that underpins all scholarship, is the right of people to say what they believe. We call it free speech. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment to that bill. So I'm just surprised that you're not for that, but then I guess I shouldn't be, because you defend Hugo Chavez. But let me just ask you one final question. If your tweet...
Now, at no point in the First Amendment does it say that no one should use their free speech to protest. And I think you know that perfectly well.
No, but it's not a question of protesting.
At no point does it say that free speech should not be loud, it should not be disruptive, it should not be unruly. These are things that have a long and venerated tradition in the United States.
And I'm not against protest, as you know.
Free speech is very different.
Protesting, Professor. You're trying to prevent a man...
to an academic platform.
It's silly. You're trying to prevent him from saying what he thinks.
Right-wing think tanks.
Okay. Last question. The tweet that you're unwilling to defend about feeling nauseous as you see a man in uniform getting a first-class seat, you protected that. You prevented the public from seeing that right after you tweeted it. If you're proud of what you think and you can defend what you think, why did you do that?
I believe absolutely in the right of people to use these platforms. I believe in the right of Charles Murray, of course, to take to Twitter and to say, you know, to spew his kind of violent racism. But that doesn't mean that he should be invited onto a university campus to do so.
I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of time. I just want you to answer my question.
Those people that he says are inferior, those people that he says are inferior have every right to protest to him, to take to the streets, to demand that he not be able to speak.
But you're not answering my question.
As human beings.
You're going on racism,
inferior.
Okay.
Yes.
I got it.
It's racism.
Are you going to answer my question?
If you don't want to recognize Charles Murray as a racist,
why are you protecting your Twitter feed
unfortunately,
if you can defend your position? Why are you hiding it from the public?
Sometimes you need to protect your Twitter feed when people who like to go on and on about free speech decide that it's time to violently threaten people who are using that free speech. I would not violently threaten a Charles Murray
Since the man who called for white genocide.
And yet,
you didn't major in irony, I can see, Professor.
Right to go speak at Villanova.
I got to go.
Absolutely absurd.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Have fun in Mexico City.